So yeah, so just a little bit about my own background. I've been playing harp since I was about 12 years old. I started off with the lever harp here in Scotland where I live. And then when I was about 17 or 18, I moved on to the pedal harp and I've played that ever since. I would say that predominantly my main instrument is the lever harp. That's kind of where my main passion is. And then as I go through this, I'll kind of talk about how they are very different instruments. It's not simply that one is a kind of lesser version and then you move on to the pedal harp, but they are really different instruments in their own right. So I'm primarily a lever harpist, but also play pedal harp and have done lots of chamber music and also, of course, write lots for harp. But in my composition teaching, what I find a lot is people have questions about writing for harp. It seems to be an instrument that people find quite challenging to write for and sort of shy away from. So I really want to encourage people. It's really important to me that we keep adding to our repertoire and diversifying the repertoire that we have for the instrument. So really, if you are composers out there, I really hope that you will go on and write more for the instrument. So I'm gonna, sorry, this is just joining. I'm gonna start sharing my screen with you. And hopefully you can see my screen now. If there's any problems, again, just let me know through the chat as we go on. But the first thing as I kind of touched on, is to understand that there are lots of different types of harp. When we talk about the harp, it is not just one thing. There are, even what I've listed here is not everything that there is. So there's the pedal harp. That's the type of harp that you would typically see in an orchestra, that's kind of the biggest of them all. There's the lever harp. That's the harp where it's much smaller in size and it has a different mechanism, which we'll go on to talk about. There's what's known as a double strung harp. A double strung harp has two, instead of just having one row of strings that go up the instrument, it has two parallel rows of strings. So you have two middle C's, two D's, two E's, and as it goes up. And there's, again, advantages for that for particular techniques that you might want to have. There's a harp that's known as the cross-strung harp, and that's exactly what it sounds. There's two sets of strings, and they, rather than being parallel to each other, they cross over each other like that. There is the triple harp. The triple harp is predominantly played in Wales. And you're looking at presenters view. Let me share that for you. Thank you for letting me know that. I'll just go into normal. Does that look better for you? Hopefully. Back to that next slide. Yeah, the triple harp is it's like an extended version of the double strung harp. It also has two parallel rows of strings, but it has a third row of strings in between those two. And that harp, it's the outer rows are tuned like the white notes of a piano. So it's like a C major on the outside. And then your inner row of strings is all the chromatics. So you can get chromatic movement that way. You kind of reach through in between the strings to get to those chromatic ones. The wire strung harp. So typically the harps that most people in kind of classical music and pedal harp, most lever harps, are strung with either gut strings or now nylon or carbon fiber, but they typically have kind of one. It's more of a unified sound. But there's also what's known as wire strung harps, and they have a very, very different tone to them. So it's a timbre that kind of rings out a lot more. It's much more piercing in tone. It's very, very different. And the way that you would play the wire strung harp is very, very different. It's played with your fingernails predominantly rather than with the pads of the fingers, the other way is. And then now there are more and more kind of modifications happening. So we have electric harps, we have MIDI harps, more and more technology is appearing for the instrument. So the first thing to understand is when you want to start writing for harp, that yeah, it's not just one thing, and that these things are all different and they all have different intricacies to them. They all have a different sound. I think that's quite important to recognize, that a lever harp will sound different from a pedal harp, which will sound different from a triple harp, which will sound different from a wire strung harp. And they all have their own unique tones, and they all have their own things that you need to be aware of when you're writing for them. So because these all have different things. There's lots of different sizes of harp. Again, a harp is not just one thing. It's not one standardized size of or a number of strings. Okay, that can vary. So if you were writing for an orchestra, you would probably presume that you were going to be writing for a 47 string concert grand, which is the most strings you can get. But that's always worth double checking, because the harpist that you're writing for might not have 47 strings. Within the kind of pedal harp family, you can also get 46 strings, you get 44 strings, 42 strings, 40 strings. It's always worth double checking exactly the instrument that you're going to be writing for. Same with the lever harp. The kind of smallest harps really that you get are about 15 strings. The largest for lever harps tends to be about 40 strings. But again, it's very, very give or take. Here in Scotland, the most common for lever harp is 34 strings. But again, it's really important to make sure that you check the range of the instrument that you're writing for in advance. And you can check that with a player. You're very welcome to email me after this, any questions that you might have, further down the line. So just make sure that you know the exact instrument that it is that you're writing for, and you know exactly the range that it has. And just remember that they come in lots of different sizes. It's not, again, not one standardized thing that you're going to be writing for. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make, or one of the biggest kind of misconceptions, is that the harp is basically just like a piano, the inside of a piano that's been turned on its side. And to a certain extent, it is. It certainly looks fairly similar, but the way that we write for the harp versus the way that we write for piano is really quite different. The harp is played with a plucking movement, and that's very different from the pressing down of keys that we're doing on a piano. The amount of time that it takes to pluck a string is quite significant. We're talking about milliseconds, but that is significantly longer in the context of big virtuosic pieces than for a piano, where you're depressing a key. And there's quite big differences in terms of things like the way that things ring on, the way that the harmony works, the ability to do certain articulation. So it's just really important that you don't kind of write a piece on piano and then automatically think, well, this will be absolutely fine on the harp, because it won't be. The biggest thing is the difference in the way that we handle chromaticism. And I'll go on to talk about that more as we go on. But yeah, really, really important to just remember, just because you've written something on the piano does not necessarily mean that it will work on the harp. It might, you might be lucky, but they are very, very different beasts. So just remember that. So what does the harp do well? I think that's whenever you're writing for an instrument and you want to write idiomatically for that instrument, it's really important to think, well, what does it do well? What is it good at? What are going to be the things where it sounds the best? So I think one of the biggest things is range. Okay, so the pedal harp, for example, has one of the widest range of any of the orchestral family of instruments. Okay, so you get 6.5 octaves in total on the pedal harp. So the only instrument that has a wider range than that is the piano. So that's a huge thing to play with. Even on, say, like lever harp I have behind me, I've got 37 strings. So a really, really wide amount of range to play with. The second thing that the harp does really, really well is dynamics. We've got a very wide and very controllable dynamic range. You can get from an absolute whisper up to something that I think people often think that the harp is gentle and soothing all the time. Like it absolutely doesn't have to be. It can be very, very loud, depending on how you kind of do your placement of chords. But we can really control that right over the range of it. So it's not like, for instance, with a singer, where in certain parts of their range they might not have so much dynamic control. We have control right over the full range of our harp. The timbre, there's a really broad range of available timbres and textures on the instrument, and we'll talk about that more. So it's not just the simple plucked sound that you get, but there's lots of other colors that we can get out of the instrument, and textural things that we can do. Self-harmonization, what I mean by that is simply that we have the ability, unlike so many other instruments, to play a melody and harmonize it without needing an accompanist. So it's absolutely wonderful for solo music. There's lots that you can do with harmony. You can also preset alternative tuning patterns. And by that, what I mean is that you can, for instance, if you've decided in advance that you want to have all of your F's in the piece, a quarter tone flat, for instance, you can have that set already. You can, you don't have to be absolutely locked in the way that, for instance, you are with a piano, where the tunings, unless obviously you can retune a piano as well, but it's much easier to retune your strings on an instrument to exactly what you want. So if for instance, you're interested in microtonality, then you could preset a particular tuning pattern on the instrument before you start playing, and it's going to stay in that tuning throughout the piece. And percussive effects, I think that sometimes you'll see the harp included in the string family, but quite often you'll see it included in the percussion family. And I think it sort of sits in some ways more comfortably actually with the percussion family, because not only have you got all the percussive effects that you can kind of do on the strings, but also on the body of their instrument. You know, you've got this enormous wooden frame that also has bits of metal and things like that. And so there's lots of different percussive sounds that you can get out of the instrument as well. So it's not just about the strings themselves, but there's lots on the whole body of the instrument that you can get. And then, of course, the kind of classic thing that a harp does better than any other instrument out there, I would say. So then it's important to also think about what are the things that the harp doesn't do very well. Some of these are just that they're very hard on the harp. Some of them are just an absolute, we can't do them. So the first is not having the ability to sustain a note, okay? There's a slight caveat to this, but in general, as soon as you have plucked any sound or struck any sound on the instrument, it is going to fade away. And the rate at which it fades depends on which string it is that you're plucking, but it will still fade away. So we have no ability to crescendo through a note. Once it is plucked, it will only decay. We don't have that ability to swell through anything. And similarly, we don't have the ability to crescendo into a note. It's always going to be that sharp attack followed by decay only. So that's kind of one of the things to really remember about the instrument. I said that there's a caveat there. Somebody at I think it's Southampton University has invented what they call an electromagnetic resonator harp. And what that does is it works with electromagnets, and they kind of they excite the string so it starts to vibrate, and then you're able to get sustained tones. The other way you can do that is you can use an EBow on the instrument. Oh, I should have got my EBow ready in case you don't know what. An EBow is like it's a little handheld device that again, it kind of works through magnetic fields, and it causes a string to start vibrating without having to actually pluck it. So that will again allow you to get one note that kind of sustains on and on and on. Now that will only work on the metal strings on your harp, so only on the ones that are wire wrapped. It won't work on any of the gut strings, but obviously if you had a wire strung harp, it will work on all of them. So that note ability is not 100%, but it depends what you're doing and with what type of instrument. The third one on that list is chromaticism is possible on the harp. And I think that sometimes people shy away from chromaticism, and it is possible, but with limitations because of either the lever or the pedal system or having the different rows of strings that you have to go in and out of. It's absolutely not as possible to be as chromatic as it is on the piano. On the piano, when you've got everything laid out in front of you and you don't have to shift anything, it's lovely. You've got all the possibilities, but on the harp, there are always limitations to the level of chromaticism that you have. And that's one of the big things that cause people to sort of shy away from writing for the instrument, because they sort of think, oh, I don't really understand how this bit works. And we will speak about that more. But you don't have to shy away from chromaticism entirely. But again, it's that thing of don't think that you're writing for a piano, because it is really different. And you've got to always think about giving your harpist time to work their way around that chromaticism if it's needed. Fourth down on that list is microtonality. So again, that sounds like I'm contradicting myself from before. If you have preset that microtonality, it's absolutely possible. So you could have a harp that was all tuned in microtones, or where certain notes were all quarter tone sharp or flat or whatever it might be. But it's very hard to do spontaneous microtonality. Again, like on the piano, like our pitches, once we sort of start a piece and our pedals are set or our levers are set, it's fairly set. You can kind of bend some of the notes a little bit, at the top. There's some pitch bending effects that you can get, but really in terms of kind of the really precise microtonality that, for instance, a string instrument could get, we don't have that ability really. Fifth on the list is repeated notes. So it's very, because the harp is plucked, it's very, very difficult to play the same note over and over again at the same intensity. Again, there are kind of ways around this, and there are certain effects that you can use. And you can do cheats like using enharmonic notes, for instance. But in general, like if you wanted to have a B flat that was played again and again in rapid succession, then that's not going to work very well. It's not going to work very well for two reasons. First of all, it's the actual physicality of this motion over and over and over again, because for your finger to come in and out has a kind of time limit on how fast we can do that. But also because the string is vibrating, every time you go back, you're going to get a little bit of a buzz. So it's important to remember that yeah, the more that you kind of repeat notes in quick succession, the more buzzing you will potentially get. So that's why they don't work so well. Then it can easily get overwhelmed by other instruments. So whilst I said before, again, it sounds a little bit like a contradiction, but whilst I said before that we have a really large dynamic range and we can really kind of make use of that big contrast between our quietest and our loudest notes, in general, the sound of the instrument doesn't project particularly well, and it does get lost very easily in an ensemble, particularly in the kind of middle register. Anything from about sort of a G above middle C downwards can get very muddy very quickly. And so if you've got lots of other forces in your pieces, then you can lose the harp quite quickly. Having said that, in the high register particularly, it projects really, really well. And you will find that even if you're kind of sitting at the back of the room, you will hear that very, very well. And then blasting buzzes. So buzzes are kind of a harpist's worst enemy, really, because there's so many sources of buzzes on the harp. It can be, like I said before, it can be about your fingers and the way that you place your fingers on the string, getting buzzes. It can be about if you're on a pedal harp, it can be when you're changing from one pedal setting to another. That can often be something that buzzes. And there's lots of things that can cause your playing not to sound quite so clean as it might. So something to be aware of. So with those things in mind, the kind of pros and the cons, it's worth thinking about some of the key points. So again, from this point forward, I'm going to speak predominantly about the lever harp and the pedal harp in kind of Western classical music or Western folk music. So again, there will be cultures where there are exceptions to these kind of general rules, but these are the main ones, I would say, and within the sort of Western classical style of playing. So one of the first rules is that most of the time, and really I mean like 99.95% of the time, we only use 4 fingers on each hand. Okay, we use our thumb and then 2, 3, 4, and that's quite important to know when we use that numbering. It's 1, thumb is 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you ever are putting fingering into a piece, that's the order. And same on the other hand, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. One of the things that's again quite different about the piano, if you think about the piano, like your hands are like this and they're like a mirror image of each other. Whereas on the harp, our hands are like this. And so they're going in the same direction to each other, which is just a kind of practical thing to consider about. In general, we never use our pinky. And again, you know, in all the repertoire I've played over the last 30 years, I can probably think of like twice when I've used my pinky, and it's because it's been a really awkward fingering and I've just needed it. But in general, what we find is that it's too weak, it's too short, and it doesn't have very much independence of its own. So that's why we don't use our pinkies. So again, it's just thinking about how does this work practically. If you have lots of extended 5-note shapes, for example, you're going to keep forcing your harpist to sort of cross over or cross under, and those turns are always points where things can fall apart. If you have a 10-note chord, the harpist is going to have to find some way to divide that between the hands, because they don't have the ability to do that 10-note span with just the 2 hands. Second of all is that our maximum reach is generally about an interval of a tenth. I've put that to sort of be on the safer side. I would say that I've got some students for whom an interval of tenth is actually still really quite wide, even on a lever harp. And for other people, especially if they've got large hands, they might well be able to go even up to sort of a 12th or so, but generally about a 10th is the most for most people. And the more fingers that you have on the instrument at any one time, the smaller overall that reach will be able to be. If you're using, for instance, I can comfortably do a 4, a 2, and a 1 over the distance of a 10th. But if I had to use my third in there as well, I would find that too much of a stretch personally. And I've said here, if you're PDLT, what PDLT means is près de la table is what it stands for. And that means when instead of playing the harp in the center of the strings, you sink your hands right down and you play right down next to the soundboard of the instrument. And when we're down there, it's much harder to have a really wide span. So again, if you're down there, you probably shouldn't exceed about an octave span overall for your instrument. Similar to that, between our fingers, that's talking about like the difference between fourth and thumb. But also we've got to think about the distance between 3 and 4 and 2 and 3. And ideally you don't want that interval to be more than about a fourth. If it's more than that, it's going to like really force them to have quite a wide span. It's going to be quite uncomfortable and probably not have a huge amount of control. So again, if you're thinking about the way to voice chords, think about trying not to have sort of suddenly like you've got a third, but then you've got a gap of a sixth, and then thumb. That's going to be really awkward for the harpist to play. And then the other thing is just, sorry, let's go back to that page. Thinking about the range of the instrument. So in general, and again, I'm talking about in Western classical music and folk music predominantly, most people play the harp resting on their right shoulder, which means that their right hand is playing the upper octaves and the left hand is playing the lower octaves. Now, with our left hand, we can play every single note on the harp quite comfortably. There's absolutely nothing stopping us. But on the right side, because we've got the bulk of the harp to get around, really, if you go any lower than about 5th octave G, you're going to struggle to get down there. So whilst the left hand can play all of them, there's a limit to how low that the right hand can be. And again, another caveat that I would say that like it also, how do I put this delicately? It depends on the size of the person as well. Some larger people will struggle to get both hands really down low if they needed to. So yeah, just think about that. So just a few more. Best keys. The harp will always sound best when it has the fewest levers or pedals engaged or on. Okay, so whenever we put a lever or a pedal on, what we're doing is we're shortening the string a little bit, and as soon as we do that, it causes a bit of a loss of resonance. So the harp is most resonant and most rich and kind of singing when it's in its sort of completely neutral state, let's call it like that. So it's like having like the gears in a car. If it's just in neutral, that's the place it's going to sound absolutely best. And the more levers that you add on, the worse it's going to sound. My lever harp, for instance, is tuned in E flat major, and that's where it sounds best. Whereas if I was to put on all the levers and put it into E major, it'll sound, it's not that it sounds worse, but it's got less richness to it. It's a bit more the tone becomes a bit more harsh and less kind of smooth and round. On a pedal harp, that neutral key would be C flat major, which I know is maybe not the most friendly key of all. But so that C flat major would be where the harp sounds best. When all the pedals are engaged 1 notch, it's C major, and then 2 notches, it's C sharp major. So C sharp major, at that point where all the strings are sharp, that would be where it would sort of sound worse comparatively. And then staccato, legato, and sostenuto. So because, as I've said before, that we don't have any ability to genuinely sustain on the instrument. We can kind of do our best to get the idea of a legato in our playing, but we can't if we're only plucking, it makes no difference whether I pluck and I say it's a staccato or I pluck and I say it's a legato. It's exactly the same thing. It's with kind of the right touch, you can get more of a sort of sostenuto sound to it. But the only way to actually genuinely get a staccato-like effect is to muffle the string with the finger or with the hand immediately after playing it. So you would pluck it and then you would go straight back to it. And so you would get the sound and then it would immediately get deadened. So if you want a true staccato effect, that's how you would do it. You'd have to use some sort of muffling effect. And similarly, we can never get a legato in the same way that, for instance, a violin can, because we can't connect those notes. So all we can do is think about how we sort of use our phrasing to give an imitation of something that's as close to legato as it possibly can be. So that's it. The repeated notes I've already spoken about. So yeah, just thinking about that, that's very difficult. And then last one is just that the harp is a very visual instrument. So I've said playing the harp is both visual and kinesthetic, and avoiding frequent wide leaps is really helpful to the harp. Generally, like a lot of what we're doing is by muscle memory, and we know I can intuitively tell you that is the stretch of a tenth and that's a stretch of an octave and things like that. But if we're jumping all over the place, that's very difficult to do from muscle memory. So you're going to have to engage eyesight within that. So if you've got both hands leaping around and you're kind of having to like look at, when you're especially on pedal harp, by the time you've got your one hand down the bottom, and they're really quite far apart from each other. They're a good meter apart. So it's just kind of thinking about what's going to make it easiest for the harpist in terms of that. Okay, so before I said, as I said, I'm going to kind of focus on lever and pedal harp for now. And it's really important to me that people don't see the lever harp as sort of a baby pedal harp. Within the harp community, there's a lot of people who talk about how they're going to progress onto the pedal harp. And I always think, like, why are you saying that you're progressing onto it? Like, they're completely different instruments. And I think people think about that because there's a huge, huge cost difference between the two. But I think that the more we see them as different instruments that are part of the same family, the better it is. So the lever harp is single action. And what I mean by that is that each string has a choice of 2 different positions that it can be in. So it can be in its lever off position and it can be in its lever on position. There's 1 lever per string, and those levers are semitone levers. Okay, so if, for instance, on my harp, I'm tuning E flat at the moment. So on my C string, in its neutral position, it's a C natural. And if I put the lever on, then what it will do is it will sharp it by a half step, so it will become a C sharp. And so those are my 2 choices I've got. It can be on or it can be off, and one will be a half step lower than the other. You can tune the lever harp in whatever key you like to start with. The kind of common ones here in Scotland, A flat and E flat tend to be the most common kind of home keys to have it tuned in. Over in America, a lot more people seem to tune in F and in C. What you need to remember with that is that there's a limit to how many, because we only have that single action, you can only go so far. So for my harp, which is an E flat, I've got that starting with 3 flats. If I put on all the levers on the instrument, I can get up, it'll take me into E major. So that takes me to 4 sharps. So I can get from 3 flats to 4 sharps, but I can't get beyond that without having to retune a string. Okay, I couldn't suddenly jump to 4 flats or 5 flats. I couldn't suddenly jump up to 5 sharps. Okay, so there is kind of more limited in terms of that. We only have that ability to go from whatever our first key is and raise it all a half step, but we can't access every single key. Whenever you're doing a lever change within a piece, we're doing those manually with our hand. Okay, so you need to, if you're writing lever harp music that has chromatic changes in it, you need to think about leaving enough time for the hand to do the lever change. Now, most of the time we'll do the lever change with our left hand. The levers run up the side that's facing our left hand, so it's much easier for our left hand to do those. We can reach over the top with our right hand if we really need to, but typically you try not to. Most of the time it's like one lever change in one movement. But again, you know, depending on how far apart they are, you might manage to do several at a time. For instance, I've got one where a piece I'm playing at the moment where there's an A, B, and E lever that all need change at the same time. And because they're all within the same octave, I can do them with my second, third, and fourth finger all simultaneously. But again, that sort of thing is worth double checking with a player if you can. And the range of the instrument is typically smaller, normally about 36, 38, maybe 40 strings is the max that you're going to get. I don't think I've ever seen a lever harp with more than that, or as a conventional one, certainly. The real pros about it is that they are much, much lighter weight than the pedal harp. And not only does that mean that they're much easier to move around and they're much easier to have in kind of different settings, but also that there is the possibility to, rather than having to have the harp on the floor, that people have kind of invented like harnesses for the harp, for instance. So it might be that you can actually physically walk around a space whilst wearing your harp and playing it. So that's quite nice if you've got kind of pieces where spatialization of the sound is important, for example. And then they generally have a lighter tension to the strings, and that's good for several, well, that's different for several reasons. First of all, it means that it's a lot easier, I think, to play really fast music on the lever harp than it is on the pedal harp, because that tension is not so high, and our dexterity can be kind of more rapid, and so that's really great. But also the sound is really quite different, and I'd really encourage you to go and listen to some lever harp versus pedal harp music, because you'll find that the sound is much brighter on lever harp. It's much kind of sharper, more kind of bell-like, I would almost say, sound to it. It's a much crisper quality is maybe a good way to describe it. To me, the pedal harp, when I go from lever harp to pedal harp, I always feel like the sound is very muted, and I have to work so much harder to get a big sound on my pedal harp, even though the actual size of it is so much bigger. So that tension and the way that they're built does make quite a big difference. So the pedal harp, in contrast, is what's called double action. And what we mean by that is that every string has the option for two other positions than its first one. So when all our pedals are off, they're all in a flat position. So if we speak about the C string again, when our pedal is off or in the most upright position, that's a C flat. When we move it one down, it goes to a C natural. And when we move it to another one down, it goes to a C sharp. And because it's the double action, that means that we can get all possible keys. Okay, we can go right from 7 flats all the way up to 7 sharps. Okay, so much more possibility for range of keys than on the lever harp, and for change of keys within a piece than on the lever harp. Now, one of the differences that's really key about them is that on the lever harp, every single string has its own lever. So I could change just one F sharp on the harp, but my other ones could be still F natural, for instance. But on the pedal harp, all of the octaves are the same note, are controlled by one pedal. So there's a C pedal that controls all of the Cs on the instrument. There's a D pedal that controls all of the Ds on the instrument, and so on. So the advantage of that is that it means that therefore it's much, much quicker to change from one key to another. If I wanted to fully change on my harp, on my lever harp, from, for instance, C major to D major, I would have to manually change every single one of the Fs and Cs. So that would be 12 lever changes in total I would have to do on my instrument. Whereas on the pedal harp, that's just 2 foot movements that we have to do. So in terms of that, it's much more sort of versatile for that. The pedal changes are done with our feet. So again, you're not having the disadvantage that we have on the lever harp of having to take your hand off the instrument and having to allow time for that, because the feet are doing all the work. It's got that larger range than the lever harp, so 47 strings. But the kind of downside is it's very heavy. It really is very, very heavy to move around. And because of that, therefore, it really has to be static. Again, you know, there's exceptions to every rule, and there are ways to move about it, but really it's quite difficult to move around with it. And it's a much heavier tension. So the sort of, for instance, for playing Irish jigs and reels. It's really, really hard work to do that on a pedal harp. So really different instruments and designed for a really different type of repertoire in general, I would say. So this is the pedal mechanism, just to kind of give you an overview of that again. So this is the order of the pedals on the harp, that you would be sitting here as the harpist, and that this is like the back of the harp. So it starts with your most left one is D, C, and then B. And then on the other side, you've got E, F, G, and A. So because of that configuration, the D, the C, and the B are generally moved by your left foot, and the E, the F, the G, and the A are generally moved by the right foot. As I said before, when they're in the highest position, they are in the flat position. When we put them into the middle notch, that puts them into the neutral position. And then when we push it again, down to the bottom notch, that puts them into the sharp position. Now, again, it's just worth thinking about logistics of this layout for us. If we wanted to change two pedals at a time, it's quite easy, for instance, for us to, if we were in C major and we wanted to go into D major, we need to add on a C sharp and an F sharp. Now that's quite easy to do because our left foot is going to do the C sharp and the right foot is going to do the F sharp. So we can do those at exactly the same time. No problem. But if, for instance, we wanted to go into A major, we could do the C sharp and the F sharp at the same time, but then the F sharp, the right hand foot would have to then move over one position to do the G. You might be able to do it at a slight angle and get both of them at the same time, but assume it's easiest to assume that they will have to do those in separate motions. There is the possibility your right foot can kind of hook round and play this B, and equally the left foot can hook round and play this E if it really needs to. But again, I would kind of err on the side of caution and don't do that unless it's really essential, and use it very, very, very sparingly if you need to. But yeah, think about again, when you're thinking about your chromaticism, think about the fact that this is your layout that you always need to think of. If you're writing for a pedal harp, I really recommend that you draw out this diagram and have it in front of you so that you can always kind of visualize what it is that you would have to be doing with your feet. So you've always got to think about the hands and the feet at the same time. And it's also worth thinking that so on the lever harp, if a string is still vibrating when you do the lever change, you will hear it. But if the string is stopped, you won't. On the pedal harp, in general, I would say that the pedal changes are noisier. A really, really good pedal harpist will have as little noise as possible. But because there are so many more strings and because it's changing all the strings at the same time, it's far more likely that you will get pedal buzzes. And sometimes you might use that to your advantage. Sometimes it can be a percussive effect that you want. But in general, again, it's just kind of really thinking that the more changes that you have, the more likely it is that you will have unwanted buzzes in your pieces. I think I've actually covered all of that. Just maybe about timing. So I've said lever changes are normally done by the left hand, and give them about at least a kind of crotchet or quarter notes value in order to do those changes, just because physically you have to do it. And similarly, that's what I was just saying about the time. And people say in general about a minimum of 2 seconds per pedal change should be allowed in a composition. So again, just thinking about what you need with that. Construction things, I think some of these again I have touched on, but with writing for the pedal harp, really check how many strings your pedal harp has. So 47 is the max, but the others are quite standard, especially for students. If you're writing, say, for like a student orchestra, it's very, very likely that they'll have a smaller instrument. So really think about double checking how many strings exactly that they have. It's also definitely worth remembering that the lowest 2 bass strings on any side of the pedal harp, so not just the 47, on all of them, they don't have the disc mechanism that allows you to do the pedal changes on those ones. So those 2 strings have to be manually retuned if you want them. So you've got to think about what the pieces that you're going to play and make sure that those 2 strings are at the pitches that you need. So you should consider that those 2 strings are permanently fixed in pitch for the purposes of any one piece, unless you actually have to like physically get your tuning key out and retune them within a piece. The sustain of the harp, so that varies really widely across the range. In the bass notes will ring for a really, really long time, whereas your top notes, the resonance on them is much, much shorter. And if you look online, there is someone has done a really good resonance charts of exactly how much ring time you can expect in the different ranges of the harp. So that's quite useful to bear in mind. And just generally, it's better to under harmonize than to over harmonize in the harp composition. And the reason for that is that there's so much resonance to the instrument and so much rings on. Unless we actively damp the strings, they will keep on ringing. So your harmony can get very muddy very quickly. So it's much better to have kind of wider spaced voicings and not such dense harmony, because it really sounds more effective that way. So notation, it uses a grand staff. So piano music and harp music look exactly the same, which is another reason I think why people often equate the two. In general, the right hand will play what's written on the upper staff, and the left hand will play what's written on the lower staff, unless it's otherwise indicated. In general, I wouldn't add any fingering or any pedaling or any lever changes unless you've checked them with a harpist. It's more annoying to have things that aren't exactly right than to not have any and put them in yourself. So you might think that you're being very helpful by putting them in, but generally, unless you've double checked it, I would probably leave them out. And think about enharmonic spelling. So what I mean by that is, for instance, in some cases, it might be that you need an F sharp, but actually you're having lots of pedal changes, and it'd be easier if you had a G flat instead. So sometimes that makes things easier. And also, when I was speaking before about frequent repetitions of a same string, that the enharmonics on the pedal harp can be a really good way around that. So for instance, again, if you needed a repeated F sharp, then what you would do is set your F string as a sharp and set your G string as a flat. And then you've got two next to each other that are to the same pitch. And that's no problem. You could play on that all day as fast as you wanted. You could just stay on that forever. That's not a problem at all. So the enharmonics can be really, really useful. And also very useful in glissandos. Think about in glissandos that if you don't want to hear all 7 pitches that your pedals are set to, you can again think about using enharmonic spellings that maybe you get a glissando, but there's only 5 pitches that you're hearing, for example, across the range. Some common effects. So there's lots and lots of common effects. And actually at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen with you, and I'm going to share something else. I will link you at the end to this resource, but I think it's an absolutely fantastic website. And I think I refer to it all the time. So let's get it up for you. So this is this website written by Gunhildur Einarsdottir as part of, I think it was as part of her PhD thesis. And in it, she gives all sorts of information about the harp generally. And actually, this might be where the decay, oh yes, here we go. That's that the thing I was speaking about before, showing the different relative decay of the different ranges on the instrument. So big difference between those top notes of 1 second versus 25 seconds down in the bass. But what's also wonderful on this website is if you go to the notation manual in it, then first of all, she gives some general notation remarks, which kind of just talk a little bit about how you write for the instrument. But then also, if you go into it, she has an absolutely wonderful library of resources of kind of all the different techniques that are available on the harp. So for instance, if you wanted to learn about harmonics, go to here, and not only does she explain them really well, but she also then has, so there's within the harmonics family, there are octaves, there's fifths, there's double harmonics, there's major thirds, lots of different ones, but you can go into any of them. And then she also has really wonderful videos. I don't know if you can hear that, I've not shared the sound. But so yeah, each technique also has a wonderful video to go along with it. So this, I really hope that she never takes this website down. It's absolutely wonderful. But some of the techniques that you might particularly enjoy are, Bispigliando, that's this wonderful kind of whispering noise that you can get. just gonna stop sharing for a second and reshare, but with my sound. 1 second. That really rapid oscillation between different things. And then so not only does she give you the video for it, but she also shows you exactly how it should be notated and how it would then be played. All the different kind of ways around it, the different ways that certain other composers might have notated it that might be different from that. And you could go into any of these things. I spoke before about Près de la Table again. This gives you a really wonderful demonstration of it. So lots and lots and lots of information on this website. It's really wonderful. And if I just kind of skim down that, you know, those are just some of the plucked effects that we have available to us. There's lots of different damping sounds. There's lots of different sliding sounds. There's all these percussive sounds that we can get. There's different effects from our pedals. There's accessories that we can use for, of course, we don't have to just play the harp with our fingers. There's other things that we can do. Talk about preparing the harp and the different sound effects that you can get from that. And also scordatura. So scordatura means that when we tune the harp in a different way than how it might be conventionally tuned. So it's a really, really fantastic resource. And that is sort of absolutely the first place I would signpost people when they were starting to actually get into the nitty-gritty of writing a piece for the instrument. So yeah, lots and lots of different sounds. I'll if I just share my screen again with you. Skip ahead now. There's, I go back to this one. Here's a whole bunch of the different extended techniques that you might come across in pieces and that you might want to check out and use for your harp in different ways. So I think that really what I love about the harp is that it feels almost limitless when you're writing for it. There are, of course, things, you know, sometimes I find myself thinking, oh God, I wish this instrument was a cello and it could do this and this and that. But there are so many other things that we can do that other instruments can't do and that we can do really effectively. And just it's like having a paint box when we have so many different colors that are available to us. I think really a huge amount of things that we can do with our instruments. So thinking about that is really like a sound machine. It's not just simply the strings on the instrument that are played in one certain way, but really there's like this huge plethora of sounds that we can get out of it, and colors and effects, and so many exciting things to explore with it. So that's one of the things I really love about it. Just a few resources, and as I say, for anyone who's coming late, I will send you all these slides, so you have a note of all these. But these are some of the really useful useful resources that you might find about writing for harp. Of course, I haven't put on this list, but I would always recommend to any composer the Elaine Gold Behind Bars. That's always very, very useful, and she gives lots of useful information in that about harp. But some other useful ones are this one, Harp Scoring, Writing for Pedal Harp, Pocket Guide to Harp Composing, Writing Well for the Modern Harp, and the Modern Harp. And then that's the link to that website that I was just showing you there. And then last of all, the other thing that I've given is a list of recommended repertoire. Now, there's an absolute hundreds and hundreds of pieces that I could have put on here, but I thought that this gives a kind of a fairly good overview of the types of different possibilities. So for instance, like the Taifel is totally different from the Barrio Sequenza, like completely different effects being used in it, which is totally different again from the Debussy. So I think that if you kind of worked your way through these, you would get a really nice overview of the types of things that have been written for harp and that are possible on the instrument. So you can kind of work your way through that. But I mean, overall, the thing to just remember is that we're not confined to any one genre of music with the harp. That it does well on jazz, it does well on classical, it does well on kind of contemporary, lots and lots of different possibilities. It's just important to think about the writing for it in a way that accentuates the things that it is really good at and minimizes the things that we find more challenging on the instrument. So I'm aware that it's kind of almost 5:02 now, so I'll open up, and if anyone's got any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself or write it in the chat, and I will try and give you any specific answers that I can. Again, for anyone who kind of came in late, I'll put this whole video up on YouTube so you can watch it again. You'll have the resources. And yeah, as I say, if you do have anything that you're writing that you just want to run past a harpist at any point, then please feel very, very free to get in touch at any point and do that. But yeah, did anyone have anything? Good, I'm glad you find it helpful, Christina. Yeah, I will email you all the slides after this. No problem again. I think it's one of those instruments that really, until you, it's all quite theoretical until you just start trying to do it, and until you write and start thinking like, well, this is what I really want to do, but oh, I'm really struggling with these pedals and I can't work this out. How am I going to make this work? What are other possibilities? How do I get around this? And that's sort of when you go through it. Christine's just asking what computer program do I recommend to write in? So to be honest, mostly I use Sibelius, and really the only reason for that is because that's the one that I'm really used to. And every time I try to change to another one, the learning curve is so high that I end up defaulting back to Sibelius. I would say that Dorico is it's probably like one of the newer kids on the block in terms of notation software, and it's really good for harp. All the scores I've seen that have been produced in Dorico are great. It's got really good harp plugins, so that is quite a useful one for it. But most of them work. At the Conservatoire, lots of the students use MuseScore, which is a completely free program. Again, you can get that to all of them. You can kind of make work to whatever it is that you want to be doing. You just need to learn all the different shortcuts and things, and it's worth as well just look at harp music, but before writing again, although it looks mostly like piano music, you will see that there's certain things that are different, or especially if you're writing music from kind of two voices in one hand, there's particular ways that we write it. So go to a music library and have a look at some scores and see the way that other composers have written for it. Good. Anything else? But most of all, I just really hope that more people will write for the instrument. I think it's really rewarding, and especially for the lever harp, we really need more contemporary repertoire. It'd be brilliant to have more diverse repertoire for that instrument. So yeah, please do write, and please do feel free to get in touch with any questions that you have. But yeah, if there's nothing, yeah, no problem at all to share the slides with harp friends. That's absolutely no problem, or composer friends, no problem at all. So great. In that case, I will finish off there. But as I say, once I email you the slides, you'll have my email address anyway, so do feel free to get in touch anytime if I can help you at all. So yeah, have a lovely rest of your evening, everyone. Thanks a lot.